So I wrote a thesis about how surfing can be seen as an environmentally destructive endeavor. So how basically, like, as much as we travel, as much as we consume, from our wetsuits to our surfboards, surfing can be seen as an environmental disaster, you know? Or we can choose something different. I was really interested in imagining how we could infuse surfing culture with more environmental activism. Then I graduated from university and I cut off my hair and I bought pencil skirts and collared shirts, and I was gonna go to the big city and do environmental work with a big NGO and like save the world, right? But the hugest blessing of my life happened then, and that was I couldn't get a job. The global financial crisis was happening the year I graduated in 2008, and no environmental organizations were hiring, like not even close. And what that afforded me was time during the day to go surfing. I was back in wild nature, and I was like, oh my gosh, how could I have moved to a city and walked on concrete all day, every day, and been disconnected from this? That would have been the hugest loss of my life, to lose connection with this. So that was just a huge blessing. And I started blogging during that time. I couldn't get a job, so I started a blog called Merci Beaucoup that later became The Seakin. And it was all about where surfing and environmentalism collide, and feminism too. I started getting a few writing jobs from magazines asking me to write about these things for them. A few companies reached out and asked if I wanted to collaborate with them as a surfer. And suddenly I was working with surfing brands again and just going, oh my gosh, how, in my mid-20s was I kind of being welcomed back into being a professional surfer again. It was not what I expected or intended to do in any way, but it sort of happened naturally because I had ideas and opinions. And at that point in surfing culture, not that many women were wanting to stand up and speak their minds about what was happening in the culture, so there was kind of a little place for me to fill. And then now I feel like we're coming into another era of women's surfing where it's kind of cracked open and there's a lot more space for riding different kinds of boards, and there's a lot more room for different kinds of women with ideas and stories contributing to surfing culture. I mean, we just saw pay equality come to the WSL, which is a huge step in sport across the board. As a female surfer, you feel a lot of pressure to look a certain way, to wear certain things, to be a certain way in the lineup. And as a professional athlete, especially now, you have this additional pressure that men kind of don't have. You need to be proficient at your sport, but you also need to make it sexy, right? When I was reflecting on the actual experience of surfing and wearing bikinis in the ocean, I was like, oh my gosh, sexy could not be any further from the truth of having to stuff your nipple back into your bikini and make sure everything is covered with your bikini bottoms, and snot getting washed out of your nose after a duck dive, all of these things that are the actual reality of being a woman in the water. And I was like, this women's surfing, it's great that women's surfing is being celebrated so much, but it's way too serious. We're taking ourselves way too seriously, and we're setting ourselves up for failure. So I made this short film called Pear Shaped, and it was all about the silly little challenges that we face, and that sort of knock back the super idealized, sexy image of being a surfer girl.
Got so much flavor, but beyond the buffet. Look at them liking me. Look at them, look what a sight to see. It's so hard, baby, look at me now. Ooh, now could it be calling the paparazzi? Since you're here now, baby, fire away. Look at them liking me. Look at them.
You know, that's one of the things that's been really sexualized over time. I've seen all kinds of like GQ videos of women like sexually peeling off their wetsuits. Oh my gosh. If there is a less attractive point in my entire life, I cannot think of it. And the feedback was incredible. So many women and men were like, oh my gosh, finally, like, how good is it to see what it really feels like to take off a wetsuit? It's gross. It's gross, and I just wanted to show that it is not sexy at all, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine, and I think people resonated with that. When I go surfing, self-consciousness finally fades into the background. I'm out there to be with friends, to lose myself in wild nature. Sure, sometimes I have boogers on my face. Or maybe I vindictively pee while you're chatting me up from down current. It's just part of being a surfer. Learning to live with all of these gushes of joy. Feminism drew me for a couple of reasons. The first was because I witnessed my mom being beaten up as a little girl. And I saw her black and blueness, and I saw broken glass through the house. So I was really drawn to like, you know, why did this happen to my mom? Why did my beautiful, loving, compassionate mother have to be the victim of such horrible violence? And then also my experience in surfing, right? As I was developing as a woman, I was being sexualized from the people around me in ways that I was totally uncomfortable with. I remember being at a surf expo and some guy being like, oh, nice nipples, as I was walking down the row of aisles. And I was like, oh my God, nipples? I've never even said that word in my life. That's so embarrassing and so humiliating. And that was a moment where I was like, oh, these guys around me think about my body differently than I do. Feminism helped me answer some of those questions about why I didn't feel like I fit in with all my guy friends in the way that I wanted to, and why my surfing was at the bottom of the totem pole as a female longboarder, like, because I was the furthest from the most aggressive, dominant, like shredding experience of surfing. Women's longboarding generally is like the opposite of that, right? It's subtle and graceful and delicate. It doesn't have to be, but my experience of surfing was that. The culture that we live in, and especially surfing culture, has mostly been created by young men, for young men, mostly white men. And if we want to create a more egalitarian, a more equal culture, a more inclusive culture, then we need more women to be allowed to have a voice and a perspective that's valued. And so I've been really involved in women's work and women's circles and gathering women to share story and surfing and being in wild nature. And then, of course, I ended up the mother of a boy to have to like flip my thinking around completely and consider how oppressive masculinity can be. To have to be strong and capable and able to fix everything, that is too much pressure for one person to take on. As a mom of a boy, I'm thinking about all the times when boys are told, don't cry, don't be a girl. That's the worst insult you can give to a little boy. Why is that? You know, and is that usually when he's expressing emotion or crying? Why are we stopping that? Why are we depriving boys of their humanity? I don't know, it seems like if we're gonna make great change socially and environmentally, we have to reform the way boys speak to themselves and the way boys speak to girls from a really young age. If we want this like aggression and domination sort of ethic that we've encouraged in boys and men, if we want that to lesson, then we have to change the way we're parenting boys. Now I'm trying to find a new balance of working, being the kind of engaged mother that I really want to be with my son, and then also finding time to surf and contribute with my writing. I mean, my favorite surfing metaphor has to do with finding the calm beneath the surface chop, right? You have the tumultuous layer of wind-affected surface of the ocean, and there's always calm below it, right? There's always a deep place of still water if you're willing to dive deeply enough. And we have that in us all the time, right?